What is the darkest unsolved mystery? Story 1. I remember watching a video about a woman who, after getting divorced, started experiencing stalking and assaults inside her own home. Every time the police arrived, no one but her was ever at the scene. Sometimes she would have bruises. Once she was found with a screwdriver impaled through her hand. This happened so many times that the police eventually stopped responding to her calls after investigations into her ex-husband and other potential suspects led nowhere. 3 months later, she vanished, only to be discovered miles away from her home, next to a highway in the middle of the desert. Her hands were tied and she was lifeless. An autopsy later confirmed she had been beaten to death. It's one of the most unsettling cases I've ever heard of. Story 2. In 1994, a rainstorm hit Oakville, Washington, but instead of regular raindrops, a strange clear substance with the consistency of gelatin fell from the sky. A local hospital decided to run lab tests on the substance after a concerned patient suggested it. The results were shocking. It contained human white blood cells. Later, a sample was sent to the Washington State Health Laboratory, where an epidemiologist named Mike McDowell examined it. He determined it was artificially made and speculated that it could be a matrix designed for transporting viruses or bacteria. However, before further analysis could be conducted, the samples mysteriously disappeared from the containment facility. Many people developed flu-like symptoms after coming into contact with it, and pets across the city, dogs and cats, began dying unexpectedly. His supervisor then warned him not to ask any questions. Despite multiple Oakville residents sending samples to different research facilities, none are known to exist today. It seems highly likely this was some kind of bioweapon test, but the real question is, by whom? I'd like to believe the U.S. government wouldn't test something like this on its own citizens. But if they weren't behind it, why was the entire incident covered up? And considering how bizarre this event was, why is it so obscure? Even if the bioweapon theory seems obvious, the logistics are mind-boggling. How did whoever was responsible manage to make it rain this substance over an entire city for days? Story 3. In 1976, residents of a small town south of Columbus, Ohio, began receiving handwritten letters filled with sinister and graphic messages. Each letter contained deeply personal details about their lives, exposing secrets that only someone closely observing them would know. One resident in particular received an overwhelming number of letters accusing her of various unsavory acts. The sender warned that they had been watching her home and monitoring her daily movements, was horrified and initially tried to keep the letters a secret, until her husband started receiving them as well. The harassment escalated when large posters began appearing around town, spreading disturbing rumors about their 12-year-old child. Then husband RN, 1977, received a phone call from someone he believed to be the letter writer. He left the house to confront them, but minutes later, he was found dead behind the wheel of his car at the end of the street. The sheriff initially suspected homicide after discovering that a single gunshot had been fired before the crash, but there was no evidence suggesting he had been shot at the scene. When it was found that he had twice the legal limit of alcohol in his system, the case was ultimately ruled a drunk driving accident. The letters resumed, this time accusing the sheriff of covering up the true cause of death. The anonymous writer also claimed the sheriff had mishandled an investigation involving the county coroner, who had been accused of disturbing acts. The harassment persisted, now with signs appearing along the roads. Then, in 1983, the original target of the letters, the woman accused of having an affair, pulled over to remove one of the signs. While attempting to take it down, she discovered a box attached to it. Inside was a small pistol rigged as a booby trap, designed to fire when the sign was removed. Paul Freshour was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in prison. But there was a glaring issue. The letters kept coming even after Freshour was incarcerated. In a new batch of messages, the writer claimed they would dig up the grave of a deceased baby and mail the remains to the police in connection to another alleged affair-turned-murder. Hundreds of residents continued receiving letters until 1994, when everything suddenly stopped. Story 4. On April 19, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The explosion claimed 168 lives, marking the deadliest terrorist attack in the U.S. until 9/11. To this day, it remains the worst act of domestic terrorism in the country's history. One lesser-known aspect of the case is the mystery of the missing leg. Investigators discovered a severed leg among the rubble and identified it as belonging to Lakeshia Levy. The only problem? Levy had already been buried, with both legs intact. Authorities exhumed her remains, placed the severed leg in her coffin, and sent the extra leg to the FBI lab for identification. However, because it had already been embalmed, DNA testing was impossible. The misplaced leg, which had mistakenly been buried with Levy, is believed to belong to an unidentified 169th victim, whose body was almost entirely destroyed in the blast. This discovery led to speculation that there may have been an additional perpetrator involved in the attack. While Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols were convicted, and two others were later identified as accomplices, some believe the presence of an unidentified victim raises further questions about who else may have been involved. Story 5. A strange but not particularly eerie mystery. The disappearance and reappearance of Lawrence Joseph Bader. Bader was a cookware salesman from Akron, Ohio, who vanished in 1957. He had gone fishing when a storm hit, and the next day his boat was found damaged. At the time, he was in financial trouble, deep in debt, facing issues with the IRS, and expecting his third child with his wife. 4 days later, a man named John Fritz Johnson appeared in a bar in Omaha, Nebraska. Spoiler alert, it was actually Larry Bader. Fritz quickly became known for his larger-than-life personality. He once sat atop a flagpole for 30 days to raise money for polio, worked as a radio announcer, became a TV sports director, and even drove around in a hearse that he had converted into a mobile bar. Despite having completely reinvented himself, he made no effort to avoid attention and even became a minor celebrity in Omaha. In 1964, doctors discovered a cancerous tumor behind his left eye, leading to its removal. Then in 1965, while attending a tournament in Chicago, an old acquaintance from Akron recognized him despite the eye patch. The man confronted him, then brought Bader's niece to confirm. She agreed it was her uncle and pressed him about it, but Fritz denied everything, though he seemed to find the situation amusing. When authorities compared his fingerprints to Bader's military records, the match was undeniable. But the mystery didn't end there. Fritz Johnson always maintained he had no memory of his previous life as Larry Bader. Psychiatrists examined him and believed he was telling the truth, despite the fact that he had clear financial motives to assume a new identity. The idea that someone could completely forget their past and construct an entirely new personality is hard to fathom, though some have speculated that his brain tumor may have played a role. In 1966, just 1 year after being rediscovered, he passed away due to complications from the tumor. Whether he was truly suffering from amnesia or had orchestrated an elaborate deception was never definitively determined. I find this case particularly fascinating because his entire personality had changed. He didn't just take on a new name, he built an entire life story as Fritz. And instead of keeping a low profile, he embraced the spotlight. I stumbled upon this case while browsing the Wikipedia category of people who have faked their own deaths, though whether Bader truly belongs there is debatable. And I have to say, every single case in that category makes for an incredible story. Story 6. There's a bridge in Scotland where dogs have been known to inexplicably jump off. It's a bizarre phenomenon, and no one knows for certain why it happens. Some of the dogs that survived reportedly walked back up and jumped again. Authorities even put up warning signs advising people to keep their dogs on a leash and to watch them closely. There are theories that scents from animals below might be triggering the behavior, but many experts have dismissed this idea. It's a strange and unsettling mystery. However, after looking into it further, I realized the story may have been exaggerated over time. While many believe it's a massive phenomenon, research suggests that only about 6 dogs have actually jumped, rather than the hundreds often claimed. It seems misinformation has spread over the years, making it seem far more dramatic than it really is. That being said, it's still unsettling and tragic that even a handful of dogs exhibited such unusual behavior. Story 7. The Salish Sea Feet or the Mad Axemen of New Orleans, 2 bizarre and unsettling mysteries. The Salish Sea Feet refer to the roughly 20 dismembered feet that have washed ashore in British Columbia and Washington State over the past 13 years. Many of the feet have been found still inside shoes. Authorities have ruled out foul play, but the mystery remains. How did they end up there? And where did they come from? Then there's the case of the Mad Axemen of New Orleans. This unidentified attacker terrorized the city in 1918 and 1919, murdering 6 people, most of them of Italian descent, using axes or straight razors. In March 1919, a letter was sent to the newspapers, allegedly from the killer, signed from hottest hell. While much of it was nonsensical, one section stood out. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. That night, every dance hall in New Orleans was packed, and homes were filled with the sound of jazz. No murders were reported. The axeman was never caught, and his identity remains a mystery to this day. Story 8. The case of the Tromp family is one of the strangest missing person stories in recent history. This Australian family owned a berry farm, but one day Mr. and Mrs. Tromp, along with their 3 grown children, suddenly became convinced they were in danger. Believing they were being watched or pursued, they abandoned their farm and fled without taking their phones, credit cards, or anything traceable. Their eldest son wasn't entirely convinced of the urgency, so he secretly brought his phone. However, at some point, it was thrown out of the car. Eventually, he decided to leave and took a train back home. The rest of the family continued traveling together, but soon began to separate under strange circumstances. The 2 daughters stole a car, but then they too became separated. One daughter made it home, while the other was found in a catatonic state in the back seat of a stranger's car. The man had noticed her only after he started driving. Meanwhile, the parents were discovered wandering aimlessly. Fortunately, they were all found physically unharmed, but the lingering question remains. What exactly happened? Was someone actually after them? Or did they collectively experience some kind of psychological breakdown? To this day, the family has not provided any real explanation for their actions. Story 9. When I was a kid, I was in my basement one day, either playing with toys or on the Wii, when something strange happened. My sister's best friend was there too, and we were talking when I suddenly got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. But it wasn't just paranoia. It was an intense, gut-wrenching sense of dread, like something truly awful was about to happen. What made it even weirder was that it was broad daylight. Our basement wasn't some dark, creepy place. It was actually the coziest part of the house, with windows that let in plenty of sunlight. The only sounds I could hear were the washer and dryer, which had just stopped a few minutes earlier. I kept trying to shake the feeling, telling myself it was all in my head. But then I turned to my sister's friend, who was looking around the room with a similar expression, and I asked, "Do you get the feeling that something really bad is about to happen?" She immediately responded, "Actually, yes." I followed up with, "Do you think we should run?" And she didn't even hesitate. "Yeah." We both bolted upstairs, and just like that, the feeling vanished. A few minutes later, out of morbid curiosity, we went back downstairs. Everything was completely normal. For years, I had no explanation for what happened. Then about 2 years ago, I stumbled across something on Reddit that made everything click. Apparently, some washing machines, especially older models, can emit extremely low-frequency sounds that are just at the edge of human hearing. These frequencies can trigger a fight-or-flight response in the brain, causing intense paranoia and dread, even when there's no real danger. So, what was probably one of the creepiest feelings I've ever experienced had a completely logical explanation. But at the time, it felt like pure horror. Story 10. I haven't seen this one mentioned while scrolling, so I'll bring up the disappearance of Andrew Gosden. He was a British 14-year-old boy, intelligent, with excellent grades, perfect attendance, and no history of trouble. One day, he left home, supposedly heading to school. Instead, he waited in a public park for his parents to leave, then returned home, grabbed some money, changed out of his school uniform into a slip-knot shirt, and took his PSP, but not the charger. After that, he went to the train station and boarded a train to London. The last known footage of him is at the train station. Interestingly, when buying his ticket, the vendor reportedly offered him a return ticket for just £1 more, but he refused. One theory suggests he might have been traveling to see a Muse concert that was happening around that time. Later, the band helped publicize efforts to locate him. Since that day in 2007, he has never been seen again. Nobody knows if he intended to return. He had no coat, no bag, and didn't take his passport. Some speculate he was inspired by the fall and rise of Reginald Perrin, a TV show about a man who fakes his own death to start a new life. As of today, he would be 27 years old. His family kept money in his bank account in case he ever needed it, but aside from withdrawing £100 on the day he vanished, he never accessed it again. There have been reported sightings over the years, but no real answers. Story 11. The Konkan Pass in Ladakh is one of the most remote and inaccessible regions in the world, sitting on the disputed border between India and China. In 1962, a military conflict took place there, but afterward, both nations agreed that neither side would patrol the area, only observe it from a distance. Since then, a strange theory has emerged, that the Konkan Pass is actually a secret UFO base. Because the region is largely untouched by humans, some believe extraterrestrial activity could be taking place there, unnoticed. Numerous reports claim that UFOs have been sighted in the area. Some even suggest that both the Indian and Chinese governments are aware of the phenomenon. In 2006, Google Maps sparked controversy when satellite images appeared to show what looked like military structures in the region, further fueling speculation. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved, with no concrete evidence. But the stories surrounding the Konkan Pass continue to intrigue conspiracy theorists and UFO enthusiasts alike. Story 12. The Winchester Mystery House is a place that has fascinated me ever since I watched a documentary about it when I was 10. Sarah Winchester, the widow of firearm magnate William Winchester, was said to be haunted by the spirits of those who had died because of the guns her husband's company produced. According to legend, a psychic told her that the tragedies in her life, including the loss of her husband and child, were the spirits doing. The only way to appease them, she was told, was to continuously build a house for them. If she ever stopped, misfortune would strike again. She took this warning to heart and spent the next 38 years constructing an enormous, bizarre mansion without ever stopping. The house is filled with architectural oddities, staircases leading to nowhere, windows that don't look outside, hallways that twist and turn illogically. By the time of her death, it contained 161 rooms. Was she really haunted, or was she simply suffering from guilt and paranoia? We may never know, but the Winchester Mystery House remains one of the most fascinating and eerie locations in history. Story 13. The Oklahoma Girl Scout murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved cases in modern history. It started in May 1977 when staff at Camp Scott, a Girl Scout camp in eastern Oklahoma, were preparing for the summer season. One night, a kitchen worker took a break, and when she returned, she found a disturbing note inside a mixing bowl. It read something along the lines of, "3 girls will be murdered at this camp this summer." Understandably shaken, she reported it, but the note was dismissed as a prank. A few weeks later, on June 12th, busloads of Girl Scouts arrived for camp. Among them were Lori Farmer, 8, Doris Milner, 9, and Michelle Guse, 10, who were assigned to a tent together. Their tent was positioned slightly apart from the others, and significantly, was the only one not visible from the counselor's tent. That night, strange occurrences were reported. Some saw mysterious lights floating in the woods. Others heard eerie sounds, guttural noises that didn't quite resemble human speech or animal calls. The next morning, a counselor walking past the tent made a horrifying discovery. Just beyond it, Goose's body was found inside her sleeping bag. She had been beaten and strangled. The screams of horror brought others running, and inside the tent, they found the bodies of Farmer and Milner. Both had suffered the same fate, and forensic examination later confirmed they had been assaulted as well. Camp Scott shut down immediately, never to reopen. Parents were called to pick up their children, but in a shocking mishandling of the situation, authorities didn't immediately disclose the victims' identities. This meant parents had to search the buses in panic to confirm if their child was safe. The investigation was chaotic. At first, authorities claimed they had extensive evidence and would make an arrest soon. Then they backtracked, admitting there were only a couple of fingerprints, and finally just one. The case went from seemingly airtight to riddled with uncertainty. Search dogs were brought in, but strange things happened. One dog died of heat exhaustion, understandable in an Oklahoma summer. Another inexplicably walked into the middle of a highway and was struck by a car. Others behaved oddly, stopping in clearings and looking directly upward as if tracking something in the sky. A suspect was eventually named, Gene Leroy Hart, a Cherokee man who had escaped from prison years earlier. He was arrested at the home of a local medicine man and put on trial. Despite law enforcement's firm belief in his guilt, the jury acquitted him. Some say it was because of racial tensions. Many believed authorities were simply pinning it on a Cherokee man to close the case. Others pointed to inconsistencies in the evidence, including a military-style boot print at the scene that was too large to belong to Hart. After the trial, Hart was returned to prison for his prior crimes, where he later died of a heart attack while lifting weights. Over 30 years later, DNA tests were attempted on old evidence, but the samples had degraded too much to produce conclusive results. To this day, the case remains unsolved. Some believe Hart was guilty. Others think there was more than one person involved. And some still wonder if something even stranger was at play, given the bizarre events surrounding the crime scene. Even now, those who visit the abandoned camp report eerie experiences, particularly near the spot where Gus's body was found. Whatever truly happened that night in 1977, it remains one of the most haunting mysteries in U.S. history. Story 14. Amid all the mysteries surrounding death, here's one about survival. During World War II, Flight Sergeant Nicholas Alcomede was aboard a Lancaster bomber on a mission over Germany when his aircraft caught fire. Trapped and unable to access his parachute due to the flames, he made a terrifying choice, jumping out of the plane rather than being burned alive. He fell from a height of approximately 18,000 feet, over 3 miles, and yet he survived. Alcomede later recalled that during the descent, he felt an eerie sense of calm. He even managed to calculate how long it would take him to reach the ground before losing consciousness. When he awoke 3 hours later, he was on the ground, alive. He had crashed through tree branches and landed in deep snow, suffering only minor injuries. However, with a twisted knee, he was unable to move and feared he might die from exposure. He blew his whistle and was eventually found. At first, his captors refused to believe his story, suspecting him of being a spy. But when they investigated the wreckage of his plane and found the remains of his burned parachute, they realized he was telling the truth. Alcomede survived the war and lived until 1987, passing away at the age of 64. Story 15. Ball lightning is a phenomenon widely accepted as real, but remains largely unexplained. I first became fascinated by it as a kid when my grandfather had a strange encounter. One day, a glowing ball of light entered through the back door of our house and followed him into the living room before vanishing. He was completely shaken and retold the story countless times until he passed away. At the time, I was obsessed with the Little House on the Prairie books, and his description reminded me of a passage I had read. I remember eagerly reading it to him, excited that his experience matched something from history. Years later, my mom took a meteorology class, which reignited my interest in weather, especially lightning. We would watch documentaries together, and I learned more about the mysteries of atmospheric phenomena. Then in middle school, we finally got a computer, and I started researching ball lightning myself. I came across various reports, and it reminded me of my grandfather's story. My mom confirmed that she remembered it too, which made me even more fascinated. Even today, I occasionally check for updates on scientific studies about ball lightning. Despite advancements in research, it remains a rare and poorly understood occurrence. Story 16. The case of the man from Torrid is one of the most bizarre urban legends ever recorded. In the summer of 1954, an unidentified man arrived at Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. When officials asked for his country of origin, he confidently stated he was from Torrid, located between France and Spain. The problem? No such country exists. Skeptical authorities checked his passport, which appeared legitimate, complete with visa stamps from Japan and other countries, seemingly verifying his previous travels. Yet when they contacted the company he claimed to work for, they had never heard of him. The hotel he insisted he had booked a room at had no record of his reservation. Even the bank listed on his checkbook didn't exist. Described as a neatly dressed, middle-aged Caucasian man, he primarily spoke French, but was also fluent in Japanese and several other languages. Officials showed him a world map and pointed to Andorra, the closest real-world location to where he claimed Torrid was. The man became visibly upset, insisting that Andorra did not exist and that Torrid had been there for 1,000 years. With no clear explanation, immigration officials detained him and placed him in a guarded hotel room overnight. But by morning he had vanished, despite the room being under surveillance. Stranger still, all of his personal documents, including his passport and ID, had disappeared from the airport's security office. The case has never been officially verified, and many believe it to be an urban myth. But if true, it remains one of the strangest disappearances in recorded history. Story 17. Two haunting disappearances occurred near my hometown, and they've stuck with me ever since. Bianca Noel Piper was a teenager in rural Missouri who vanished in 2005. She had been receiving therapy for bipolar disorder and struggled with anger and depression. One night, after arguing with her mother on the drive home, her mother stopped about a mile from their house and told Bianca to walk the rest of the way to cool off. According to her parents, this was a technique suggested by her therapist to help her walk off her frustration. However, it was nighttime, the middle of winter, and she was wearing only a hoodie. When Bianca didn't come home within an hour, her parents went searching for her, then contacted the police. No trace of her was ever found, and the case remains cold. Some suspect the mother, as allowing a teenager to walk alone in such conditions was dangerous to begin with. However, authorities cleared the parents of wrongdoing. Still, the case remains open to new leads, and many believe someone out there knows what happened to Bianca. Then there's the case of Angie Hausman, a 9-year-old girl who disappeared in the late 1980s. My mom told me about this case as she remembered it unfolding while she was in high school. One day, Angie told her teacher she was going to visit a new friend. That afternoon, she got on the school bus, but she never made it home. A few days later, a hunter discovered her in a wooded area. She had been tied to a tree, her clothing removed and left nearby. Tragically, she had been assaulted and left to die of exposure. Based on forensic evidence, she had only passed away a few hours before being found, meaning she had been alive and suffering for days. Her killer was never identified, and like Bianca's case, it remains unsolved. My mom has strong suspicions about who might be responsible, someone from the area who later died in prison for similar crimes. But officially, the case is still open. Story 18. I don't remember the boy's name, but his case has always stuck with me. He was around 6 years old when his mother, struggling with depression, broke up with his father. She adored him. He was her happiness, and she brought him everywhere she went. One day, she took him to a park, gave him candy, and then entered a store alone. Nothing unusual, right? Many parents leave their kids outside for a moment while running errands. But that was the last time anyone ever saw her alive. She had taken her own life, leaving behind a cryptic message that said her son was safe, in a place he would never be found. His father was devastated. He spent years searching for his son, hoping to bring him home. At one point, a teenager came forward, claiming to be the missing child. But the story unraveled when it was discovered that he was actually an adult who frequently posed as missing children. The case faded from public attention, and to this day, no one knows where the boy went or what happened to him. Story 19. From February to May 1946, a mysterious figure known as the Phantom Killer terrorized the town of Texarkana in a brutal string of attacks that became known as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Over the course of 3 months, this unidentified assailant injured 3 people and took the lives of 5 others. The attacks, which mostly occurred at night, sent the entire town into a state of panic. Fear spread so rapidly that a citywide curfew was enforced, keeping residents off the streets after dark. People rushed to purchase guns, ammunition, and locks in an effort to protect themselves. Even the Texas Rangers were called in to assist with the investigation. Then, just as suddenly as the killings had begun, they stopped. The murderer vanished without a trace, leaving behind only fear and speculation. Many believe the killer either satisfied his urge for violence and fled, or realized authorities were closing in and disappeared to avoid capture. To this day, the Phantom Killer has never been identified. The case remains one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in American history, and even served as inspiration for the cult classic horror film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Story 20. There was once a wealthy investor, someone who moved in the highest circles of power. He handled money for presidents, princes, and even monarchs. He was successful, intelligent, and well-connected. But beneath his polished image was a dark and horrifying secret. He was running an international child trafficking operation, supplying the very same powerful figures he did business with. For years, he operated in the shadows, until one day the truth came to light. His crimes were exposed, and the world was shocked. He was arrested and charged, awaiting trial in what many believed would be a groundbreaking case. Justice at last seemed within reach. His testimony had the potential to reveal the names of high-profile individuals involved in his operation, but before he could testify, he was found dead in his jail cell. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. Yet the circumstances surrounding his death were deeply suspicious. The guards assigned to watch him had reportedly fallen asleep. Surveillance footage from his cell mysteriously vanished. Fellow inmates claimed they heard screams coming from his cell, and a coroner's report suggested there was evidence of foul play. Despite all of this, the case was closed. Whatever happened in that cell that night, one thing is clear: the full truth may never come to light, but most people already have their own conclusions. Story 21. The Kenora Bomber, a name that still lingers in the history of northwestern Ontario. In 1973, a man walked into a CIBC bank in the small town of Kenora, wearing a vest made of dynamite. It was wired with a dead man's switch, 2 clothespins rigged to the bomb, ensuring that if he was harmed and his mouth opened, the explosive would detonate. As he carried out the robbery, plainclothes officer Don Milliard escorted him outside, trying to negotiate. A large crowd of townspeople had gathered nearby, watching the situation unfold. But then things took a deadly turn. Against direct orders, a rogue officer named Latane fired a shot, hitting the robber. In an instant, the massive explosion rocked the entire street, shattering windows and sending debris, body parts, and cash flying in every direction. Bloodied banknotes from the robber's duffel bags spiraled down amid the smoke and wreckage, covering the block and beyond. Officer Milliard, who had been standing close to the bomber, was critically injured but miraculously survived. Latane, despite disobeying orders, remained on the police force until his retirement. The town was in shock for weeks. The explosion made international headlines, but the mystery didn't end there. The robber's identity was never discovered. The Cessna airplane he had requested for his escape implied he had a pilot's license, but no missing persons, fingerprints, or other clues ever led to his identification. Almost 50 years later, the Kenora bomber remains unknown, his identity lost to time, leaving behind only speculation and a town forever marked by the unforgettable explosion. Story 22. The Tribech disappearances have always left me unsettled. This mystery raises more questions than answers. Tribech is a small mountain range in Slovakia, and from 1929 to 1995, possibly even into the 2000s, about 73 people vanished there under mysterious circumstances. Only one was ever found alive: Walter Fisher, a former worker at the Bacha shoe factory. Fisher disappeared in January and wasn't found until May. When he was finally discovered, his body was covered in severe burns and he was barely conscious. He was rushed to the hospital where he managed to survive, but the experience left him so traumatized that he could never recount what had happened. He spent the rest of his life in a mental institution. One of the strangest details: the majority of these disappearances occurred in the winter months. There used to be a blog dedicated to investigating these cases. The writer once posted something eerie. On December 10th, I will travel to Tribech and try to walk through the area. I'll bring my camera and document my experience. I'll post about it once I return. Hopefully, I'll still be able to post this month. The blog was never updated again. In 2019, a Slovakian film titled The Rift, Trlina in the original language, was released based on the disappearances. Yet, despite nearly a century of speculation, the mystery remains unsolved. Story 23. He was implicated in a case involving missing money from a courthouse evidence vault. He faced allegations of misconduct and illegally handling a witness in a major drug trafficking trial, leading the judge to order a federal investigation. The only way to stop that investigation was to arrange a quick plea deal to close the case, but that would have required breaking federal law. At 5 a.m. in rural Pennsylvania, Luna's car was found with the lights off and its front end submerged in a stream. Blood was smeared across the driver's door and the front left side of the vehicle. Luna was discovered face down in the stream, pinned under the car's engine. He was wearing a suit and a black overcoat, with his court ID still hanging around his neck. A pool of blood was found on the rear seat floor. Although he had been stabbed 36 times in the chest and neck with his own pocket knife and had sustained a head injury, the official cause of death was drowning. Federal authorities, FBI, leaned toward calling it a suicide, concluding that Luna had been alone from the moment he left his office until his body was found. However, local Lancaster County authorities, including 2 successive coroners, ruled it a homicide. Luna had left behind his glasses, which he needed to drive, and his cell phone on his desk. Earlier that night, he had called defense attorneys, informing them he would fax over documents, but the faxes never arrived. The pool of blood in the back seat suggested Luna had been in the back of the car at some point, meaning someone else may have been driving. The investigation remains open, and a federal reward of $100,000 is still unclaimed for any information leading to a conviction. Story 24. The disappearance of the Sarah Jo remains one of the strangest maritime mysteries. Back in 1979, 5 men set off on a fishing trip from a bay in Hawaii. They got caught in a storm and never returned. An extensive search turned up no sign of them or their boat, the Sarah Jo. All hope was lost until 1988, when John Naughton, a biologist who had been part of the original search crew, was conducting a survey of an atoll in the Marshall Islands, nearly 2,000 miles from where the Sarah Jo had vanished. Upon arriving at the atoll, John immediately recognized the wreckage of a boat as the Sarah Jo and began searching the area. What he found was even more baffling. A single shallow grave, carefully arranged stones, a cross, and a stack of papers separated by sheets of tinfoil. The grave contained the remains of one of the missing men, but the other 4 were nowhere to be found. And here's where it gets even stranger. The atoll had been surveyed just a little over a year before, and at that time, there had been no sign of the boat, the men, or the grave. Experts determined that if the boat had drifted that far, it should have made the journey in about 3 months, meaning it should have arrived there years before. So why was there no trace of it until nearly a decade later? Who buried the crew member? Where were the other men? And what was the significance of the strange stack of papers with tinfoil? Too many questions remain unanswered. Story 25. The case of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, the 2 young women who went missing in Panama, is filled with unexplained details and unanswered questions. While their remains were eventually found, the locations and states of decomposition were inconsistent and raised more concerns than they answered. Many dismissed the case as 2 inexperienced tourists who overestimated their abilities, took a dangerous trail, got lost, and died of exposure. But that explanation ignores a long list of strange details. Perhaps they did get lost and succumb to the elements. But there is undeniable evidence of human interference between their disappearance and the discovery of their remains. For one, their backpack, containing their phones and camera, was found 7 miles upstream from where they were believed to have been, completely undamaged by water. That alone suggests that someone moved their belongings. Whether that person was involved in their fate or simply abandoned the bag to avoid suspicion remains unknown. But this single fact alone rules out a straightforward accident. What really happened to Chris and Lisanne remains one of the most unsettling unsolved mysteries. Story 26. Huska Castle in Czechia is an architectural enigma. Its construction seems to serve no real strategic purpose, and it lacks external fortifications, something highly unusual for a medieval castle. Even stranger, at the center of the structure is a massive hole, and the walls surrounding this area are thicker than those on the exterior. Again, an oddity in castle design. According to old folklore, the hole in the middle of the castle is a gateway to hell, and the castle itself was built to trap the demons inside. Legends tell of horrific creatures that emerge from the abyss and of the fates that befell those sent to explore it. It's hard to believe that royalty at the time would have wasted resources constructing a useless fortress, which raises the question, what was really in that cave? Some speculate it could have been an underground prison, a secret chamber, or something even more sinister. Whatever the truth may be, Huska Castle remains one of the most mysterious and unsettling medieval structures in the world. Story 27. One of the strangest mysteries I've ever encountered is the disappearance of my cat. His name was Wolf, and he was everything to me. He was intelligent, affectionate, and had a strong personality. But one day everything changed. He was hit by a car, and though he survived, it was like his brain had reset. He didn't remember how to do basic things, and his behavior was completely different. After the accident, he barely ever went outside, just to the backyard to pee, and then he would immediately run back inside. Then one night, something unexplainable happened. He suddenly became desperate to go outside. He meowed constantly, pacing by the door, crying louder than I had ever heard him before. It was as if something was calling him. Eventually, we let him out. That was the last time I ever saw him. He never came back. No one in the area saw or heard anything. No signs, no remains, no trace of where he could have gone. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something was luring him outside. Something took him, and I'll never understand why. Story 28. This is one of the creepiest things my older cousin ever told me. It happened in a high school gym locker room back in 1999. The locker room was divided into sections with rows of lockers, and the entire class was in there changing into their PE clothes. Then suddenly the room was filled with loud, piercing screams coming from an area blocked from view by a wall of lockers. The screaming lasted for about 5 seconds. Then silence. When someone finally went to check, they found 3 students on the floor, nearly decapitated. The doctors who examined them determined that the wounds had been so severe that their spinal cords had been severed. The scariest part? They never caught the killer. There was no exit other than the main entrance, and yet no one saw anything. No murder weapon was ever found, which ruled out the possibility of a murder-suicide. That meant one thing: the murderer had to be a student, and they got away with it. The entire school was in shock. Everyone knew that someone among them had done it. They were walking the same halls, sitting in the same classrooms as a murderer. My cousin has a theory. He believes the killer planned everything in advance. He thinks the person who screamed was actually the murderer, deliberately creating chaos and confusion before slipping back into the crowd unnoticed. For what it's worth, my cousin and his friend were the only 2 people completely ruled out. They had been talking to the coach at the time, and security footage from inside the coach's office confirmed it. Eventually, the school renovated the locker rooms. The area where the murders happened was turned into a storage closet. No one wanted to use it after that. Even now, all these years later, it still creeps me out just thinking about it. Story 29. The disappearance of Andrew Gosden remains one of the most baffling cases in recent history. Andrew was 14 years old when he vanished in September 2007. He was a bright student, and his parents had no reason to believe anything was wrong. He had seemed perfectly happy about going back to school. Then one morning he skipped school. CCTV footage shows him leaving his house and then returning about an hour later, after his parents had left. He withdrew 200 pounds from his bank account, nearly all the money he had, then went to the train station. The ticket seller even told him that a return ticket to London was cheaper, but he insisted on a one-way ticket. The last confirmed sighting of him was CCTV footage showing him arriving at King's Cross Station. After that, he simply disappeared. His family never gave up searching for him. They released public statements assuring him that, no matter what, he was always welcome to come home, even suggesting that if he had run away because he was gay, they would support him unconditionally. But Andrew never made contact. The case became even stranger when investigators checked his home computers. He didn't have his own phone or computer, and a thorough search revealed that he had no social media accounts, no online activity, and no trace of communication with anyone who might have lured him away. One theory suggests that Andrew may have attended a summer camp for gifted students, and that an adult from that camp could have groomed him, maintaining contact in some undiscovered way. But with no evidence to support it, the mystery remains unsolved. To this day, no one knows what happened to Andrew Gosden. Story 30. Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon were Dutch students who disappeared on April 1st, 2014, while hiking in Panama. After an extensive search, fragments of their remains were discovered months later, but the exact cause of death remains unknown. Dutch authorities, working alongside forensic and search and rescue experts, speculated that the women may have fallen from a cliff after becoming lost. However, the circumstances surrounding their disappearance and the aftermath have fueled endless speculation. 10 weeks after they went missing, a local woman turned in Froon's blue backpack, claiming she had found it in a rice paddy near a riverbank in Alto Romero, Bocas del Toro. She insisted that it hadn't been there the day before. Inside the backpack, authorities found 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in cash, Froon's passport, a water bottle, Froon's camera, 2 bras, and both women's phones. Everything was intact, dry, and in near-perfect condition. Phone records revealed that just hours after their hike began, someone attempted to call emergency services. Kramer's iPhone dialed 112 at 1639, and Froon's Samsung Galaxy dialed 911 at 1651. Due to the remote area's poor reception, none of the calls went through, except for a single 911 call on April 3rd that lasted just over a second before the signal was lost. After April 5th, Froon's phone battery died and was never used again. Kramer's iPhone continued to be powered on sporadically, likely in search of reception. But on April 6th, something eerie happened. Multiple incorrect PIN attempts were made, locking the phone permanently. Between April 7th and 10th, at least 77 more emergency call attempts were made. On April 11th, the phone was switched on at 10:51 a.m. and turned off for the last time at 11:56 a.m. Froon's camera contained photos from April 1st showing the women on a trail near the Continental Divide. Nothing seemed unusual until April 8th. That night, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., 90 flash photos were taken in complete darkness, deep in the jungle. Some images depicted a river or ravine, while others showed a twig with plastic bags and candy wrappers placed on a rock, a mirror and toilet paper on another rock, in the back of Kremer's head. The discovery of the backpack led to further searches. Kremer's denim shorts were later found several kilometers away, either neatly folded on a rock, according to one report, or submerged in the river, according to another. Then months later, bones began to surface. A pelvis and a boot with a foot inside were recovered near the riverbank. Soon, 33 scattered bones were found, confirmed by DNA to belong to the two women. Yet the forensic details made the case even stranger. Some of Froon's bones still had skin attached, but Kremer's bones appeared to have been bleached. A Panamanian forensic anthropologist noted that under magnification, there were no scratches or marks, neither from animals nor tools on the bones. The mystery surrounding their deaths remains unsolved, and the bizarre cell phone activity, the false PIN attempts, and the haunting nighttime photos only deepen the unsettling nature of the case. Story 31. This isn't one of the most well-known cases, but I came across it recently, and I can't stop thinking about it. A husband and wife had temporarily moved to Puerto Rico, where the husband was conducting research for an article he was writing. As he delved deeper into his investigation, he started asking questions. Too many questions, and to the wrong people. That's when the strange things started happening. Their home alarm kept going off. Untraceable calls flooded their phones. The intimidation tactics escalated. Then one day the husband went out and never came back. His wife tried calling him repeatedly, but there was no answer. Desperate, she contacted the police only to be told that he had probably left voluntarily. Refusing to accept that explanation, she involved his family and together they began searching for him. Not long after, a body matching his description was found. The wife was called to identify him. It was her husband. Authorities quickly labeled it a suicide. They claimed he had jumped from one of the upper floors of a building where his body was found. His injuries, severe bruising, deep gashes, were consistent with a fall. But something wasn't adding up. The higher floors of the building had only half windows that couldn't open fully. There were no accessible ledges from which he could have climbed and jumped. And then, the most damning detail, his cell phone and glasses were found completely intact, without a single scratch. If he had truly jumped from a great height, how could those fragile items have remained undamaged? Meanwhile, his shoes were torn and scuffed, as if he had been dragged or in a struggle, details that directly contradicted the suicide theory. The investigation was brief. The medical examiner ruled his cause of death as undetermined. The lead detective on the case, convinced it wasn't suicide, began pushing for answers. Then suddenly he was reassigned to low-priority cases and silenced. The wife's suspicions grew. She discovered that her husband had left behind a so-called suicide note, but it wasn't what anyone would expect. Instead of a typical farewell, the note contained a bizarre list: movie titles, actor names, and cryptic references. Intrigued, his family began researching those clues, piecing together information about powerful organizations he had been investigating. It became clear he had uncovered something dangerous, and he was silenced before he could expose it. The case remains open, but no further progress has been made. Authorities seem reluctant to dig any deeper. Those who once showed interest were quickly pulled away from the case. What he discovered, and who wanted him gone, may never be known. Story 32. The disappearance of Lars Mittink is one of the strangest unsolved cases in recent history. On June 30th, 2014, 28-year-old Lars Mittink traveled to the seaside resort of Golden Sands, Bulgaria, for a vacation with his friends. On July 6th, he got into an altercation with 4 other men over a football dispute. Mittink, a Werder Bremen fan, had clashed with fans of Bayern Munich. The fight left him with a ruptured eardrum. When it was time to fly home, a doctor advised him not to board the plane due to his injury, prescribing him the antibiotic cefuroxime and recommending further medical consultation. His friends wanted to stay, but he insisted he was fine and would return home on his own. Alone in Bulgaria, Midonk checked into the Hotel Color Varna. That's when things took a bizarre turn. Security cameras captured him behaving strangely, pacing the halls, appearing paranoid and on edge. That night, he called his mother in a hushed voice, claiming that 4 men were coming to kill him and urging her to cancel his credit cards. The following day, Midonk arrived at Varna Airport, intending to fly home. But once inside, his behavior became even more erratic. Security footage shows him suddenly panicking, clutching his bag, and bolting out of the terminal. He sprinted through the airport, climbed over a fence, and ran into a sunflower field near the Bulgarian National Highway A2. He was never seen again. Despite extensive searches, no sign of Midonk has ever been found. His sudden fear, paranoia, and inexplicable escape remain a chilling mystery. What scared him so badly? Was he suffering from a reaction to his medication? Or was there truly someone after him? To this day, his disappearance remains unsolved. Story 33. The mysterious disappearances of children in the Midwest, particularly in and around national parks, follow a disturbing pattern. Children vanish in an instant. They're one moment, gone the next, often in close proximity to adults. There are no sounds, no signs of struggle, no blood, no torn clothing, no trace. Years later, remains are often discovered in areas that had been repeatedly searched. Even stranger, their clothing and shoes are usually found in good condition, with no evidence of what happened. There have been a handful of survivors, but their stories only deepen the mystery. One case involved a 3-year-old boy who vanished from his farm. 10 hours later, his footprints were found 8 miles away. The next day, he was discovered alive, 10 miles in the opposite direction, on a mountain with no roads. At the time, he had trouble walking, yet somehow, he had covered 18 miles in just 24 hours. Today, he's 65 years old and has no memory of what happened. In another case, during a 6-day search for a missing child, search dogs suddenly picked up a strong scent. As the team moved in, a thick fog rolled over the area, obscuring their path. The dogs lost the scent. Then out of nowhere, one of the search dogs began barking uncontrollably. Seconds later, the missing child walked out of the fog. He was completely naked, unharmed. No recollection of what had happened. What is happening in these forests? And why do so many of these disappearances share the same eerie details? The answers remain unknown. Story 34. This happened in my country, not far from my city. It was August 20th, 2019, when a teenage girl was kidnapped. I won't use her real name, but we'll call her Elise. She had just finished tutoring and needed a ride home. With no other options, she accepted a ride from someone heading in the same direction. She never made it home. Instead, Elise ended up in the hands of a kidnapper. He took her to his house where she was cruelly assaulted. At some point, he left the house to run an errand. That's when she found a phone. She called the police, but the authorities failed her. Despite having her call, they couldn't locate her in time. To this day, no one knows if Elise was killed or if she was trafficked. She simply vanished, and she wasn't the only one. Just 2 days earlier, another girl, 3 years older than Elise, was taken. We'll call her Sarah. Both girls disappeared without a trace. I still get chills when I think about it. The thought of their families living with the horror of not knowing if their daughters are dead or alive. It's heartbreaking and terrifying. Story 35. Sandby Borg, located on Öland, Sweden, holds the chilling remains of a brutal massacre that occurred 1,500 to 1,400 years ago. An unknown group of people decided that an entire village no longer had the right to exist. When the slaughter was over, the bodies remained where they had fallen, untouched for centuries. Archaeologists began excavating the site in 2010, uncovering horrifying evidence of the attack. In one building, a man was found collapsed in the doorway, likely trying to close it or warn those inside. His killer caught him just as he was stepping in, and he fell forward into the house. The murderers then stepped over his body and slaughtered everyone inside. So far, no female remains have been discovered, though several small children were found. This suggests that the women were either herded together and executed elsewhere, or taken as captives. For centuries, locals avoided the site, and it wasn't until the 19th century that stones were removed for building projects, and parts of the land were repurposed for farming. The entire site has yet to be fully excavated, meaning even darker secrets could still be buried beneath the surface. A massacre frozen in time, waiting to reveal its last terrible truths. Story 36. This is a strange one. A Russian man named Karnay ran a YouTube channel, which roughly translated to how to make. Most of his videos were about bizarre science experiments, things like homeopathy, the elixir of life, and other questionable theories. But one video stood out: his attempt to create a homunculus. A homunculus, Latin for little man, is an artificial organism supposedly made by combining DNA from different species. The first attempt in Carney's video appeared fake, with what looked like a piece of plastic inside an egg. But his later attempts became unsettling. In one video, something inside the egg moved. It writhed unnaturally, then squirted liquid at him. Startled, Carney immediately killed it. In a later experiment, he created another creature. This time, it was more active, had a different color, and displayed clear animal-like traits. He kept it in a tank, where it continued to grow. The creature had a strange appendage used for feeding, and even seemed capable of producing an electric discharge. Many attempted to debunk his videos, claiming he was using magnets or stop-motion effects. But skeptics struggled to explain some of the details, like how the creature moved with lifelike fluidity or how an apparent electric shock was produced without any visible power source. Then Carney died suddenly of a heart attack. His mother died the same way shortly after. His channel still exists, frozen in time. Whether it was all an elaborate hoax or if Carney actually created something that defied biological principles remains a mystery. Story 37. The case of Ray Rivera is one of the most baffling and suspicious deaths in recent history. In the early 2000s, Ray, a Baltimore man, went missing. His body was later discovered in a hotel conference room, but the way he got there made no sense. He had fallen through the roof. Investigators struggled to determine from where he could have jumped. The possible jumping points all seemed implausible due to angles, distances, and barriers. Adding to the mystery, his phone and glasses were found completely intact, despite the force of impact that should have shattered them. Then his family found something even stranger. Behind his computer was a cryptic note containing references to Freemasons, a list of Ray's favorite movies and actors, and names of people he knew. But oddly, some important names were missing. On the night of his disappearance, his wife's coworker overheard him on the phone. The last thing Ray said before rushing out of the house was a surprised, "Oh." He was never seen alive again. Authorities ruled it a suic, but his family suspects foul play. At the time, Ray was working for his longtime friend, Frank Stansberry, who was being sued for millions over fraud. Could his death have been linked to something he discovered? The case remains unsolved. Story 38. This happened to me in the mid-1980s when I was in my mid-20s living in a European city. I was shopping for a stove and went to a small appliance store in the old part of town. It was tiny and crammed with stoves, washing machines, and other appliances. There was only a single narrow path that snaked through the store, meaning I had to follow along behind a salesman and two women as they examined the stoves ahead of me. As we slowly moved through the store, I saw one stove that I really liked. But by the time we reached the end of the path, the salesman was still talking to the two women, so I decided to leave and return the next day. When I went back, the same salesman was there, but the stove I had liked was gone. Surprised, I asked about it. He insisted they had never stocked that type of stove. I described it in detail: 2 electric burners, 2 gas burners, and some other specific features. He shook his head. They didn't carry anything like that. Confused, I told him about the 2 women from the previous evening. I repeated parts of their conversation, details about an upcoming wedding, specific words exchanged. The salesman went quiet. He admitted that yes, he had been there, and yes, he had helped 2 women around 6:30 p.m. Then he went to check the store's inventory records. After a few moments, he pulled out the item card for the stove I had described. The last time they had sold that model was exactly 10 years before my visit. I have no explanation for what I experienced. Somehow, I had seen a stove that had been sold a decade earlier. The 2 women, the salesman, the store, all of it had seemed completely real. I eventually wrote a short story about it for a local literary paper, but it wasn't until recently that I truly started thinking about it again. To this day, I still have no idea what really happened.